Excuse me?
Yes.
Do you speak English?
Yes.
I'm street photographer.
Maybe you've seen these videos floating around on TikTok or Instagram. Yeah, there's a problem with them. And no, I'm not talking about the bit where they seem to only ever take photos of girls in sundresses or their poor music choices. See, the problem is this. Let me explain. Street photography is maybe one of the most misunderstood art forms out there, and videos like this are making it worse. Street photography is kind of like jazz.
You like jazz?
In the way that it became a style through an artistic breaking of the rules of photography, which is one of the things I love about it, but it can also make it hard to clearly define. This is not street photography. This is also not street photography. This is portraiture. I shot these portraits on the street, sure, but they're street portraits. Don't for a second think that I'm gatekeeping here. Street portraits are a really cool art form in themselves, but I think it's important in this case that we do make a distinction. There's nothing wrong with this, but since they've been going a little bit viral, it's starting to cause a little problem. See, when enough people have seen one or two videos like this on their feed, they begin to think that photos like this represent what street photography is, when more often it's photos like this. And that can lead to people misunderstanding the goal of street photography in the first place, which for me is to capture moments of coincidence and connection in the chaos that is public life. Or more simply, and maybe in a way that also works for your approach, is to tell a story about something we saw. It's so easy to forget how bubbled up we are in the art world, and when the layperson hears street photography and thinks we're hiding in the bushes with a super zoom taking photos like this, it has the potential to really damage the reputation of real street photography. Not just on a personal level, but also in terms of legality, artistic authority, and even worse, in my opinion, is that it can lead new photographers who are just getting into street photography to believe that that's all there is to street photography when it can be so much more than that. When I'm encouraging you to shoot street, I'm not just hoping that you go out and take great candids. I'm hoping that you go out and discover that you can see the world in a completely different way. There are so many different ways to approach doing this. My style tends to be wide angle, close up, chaotic composition. I like to keep my framing a little loose and my focus deep, and I like to throw in a little bit of humor now and then. But other photographers shoot in completely different ways. Joshua Jackson likes to shoot with longer lenses and explores texture and color much more, using blocking and light to create these beautiful compositions. Brian Carlson likes to find traces people have left behind and tell us stories about the people in their absence. The common thread through all of this is that a lot of street photography focuses on looking just a little harder at stuff that we usually skim over in our everyday life. What is that flyer on the ground? What does that person's t-shirt say? Seeing the world with this sense of wonder and openness, finding little sparks of the human spirit in everyday life. If you compare Joshua's work to my work, it's intensely different in its style and aesthetic. A few years ago on New Year's Eve, I shot street with Joshua and a few other friends, and we noticed a lot of the same things. We found this common ground in the way that we saw the world, even though our styles were so different. While I was shooting this, Joshua noticed this little moment and pointed it out to me, and I shot it. It's almost like we co-directed the photo together, and it works. The point is, street photography isn't really about taking photos of people. It's about taking photos of stories. Maybe even more, it's about taking photos of thoughts and feelings and ideas. Or, hold on to your hat for this one, if you want to get really deep, it's a way to photograph yourself from the outside in. My photos aren't just a photo of a dude having a smoke. My photos are, like, as a whole collection, a single image of what it's like to be inside my brain. The things I notice, the things I appreciate or find inspiring and challenging or confusing and strange. If you also find the entire world a bit confusing and strange sometimes, go ahead and click the like button and subscribe so that we can hang out and talk about it more often. Let's bring it back to reality for a bit and to these TikToks. They don't really do any of that, I think, because street portraiture is just a different art form, just like landscape photography is a different art form. Just because there's people in the photos and they're on the street doesn't really mean that they have that much in common. Presenting it as street photography doesn't just skew the public's opinion of what street photography is either. I think it actually puts the creators of these TikToks in kind of a weird place. Like, I am firmly in the camp of street photographers that are bolder, more in your face, and more risky, but even to me, sniping somebody from down the street with a 400mm lens just feels a bit odd, especially when most of them are girls in sundresses who definitely aren't staged. I don't want to single anyone out here, but look at these screenshots from some of these TikToks I'm talking about, and then look at the street portraits I took. Yes, there's a difference to style and look and feel since I shoot on wides and most of these people are shooting on tellies, but there's also a difference in feel because I'm in the portraits I shot too. I think you can tell that I'm participating in the photo more collaboratively with the subject. I've approached them, we've chatted, and I've managed to capture the feeling and energy in that little connection that we created in that time. There's none of that because there was no connection. It's just a picture of a girl. Here's a picture of my 100% cotton embroidered tee. If you're into it, there's a link below. Maybe you should pick one up. Look, I'm not a portrait photographer, but I've shot a shitload of portraits, and I think the ones that have stuck with me the most and the ones that I love the most have almost always come from this collaborative back and forth creative process between the subject and the photographer. It's almost like a dialogue. Finding the right way to represent somebody and take their photo requires a certain level of intimacy and connection. And that's a big part of what makes the art of street portraiture so amazing, is that the photographer was able to create that environment and that connection and that intimacy in such a fleeting moment and short space of time. I have taken a lot of awful photos, like a lot of awful photos. But one thing I'm really proud of is whenever I've shot portraits of people, they are always really happy with how they look. Even people who usually hate being in front of the camera have said to me that it's the first photo of them that they've actually liked in a while. In these photos, that might not be the case because the subject wasn't involved in that dialogue or that connection. In more conventional street photography, that dialogue and connection takes more of a back seat to the overall context and the story and the scene of what's going on. So typically, you tend to see more obscured faces, people are further away, and the subject is more often the world as you see it and not one particular person. Ultimately, street photography is about doing photography your way, and that means nobody, including me, of all people, can tell you how to do it. I'm just a dude who puts videos on YouTube. However, I personally, truly, deeply believe that if you go out to take photos with a slightly wider perspective than what's shown in these TikToks, and maybe if you draw inspiration from some artists that tend to shoot wider, like Meyerowitz or Levitt, you might just have a more exciting time on the street. You might just take photos that you like more, and most of all, you might find out that you actually have a lot more to say about the world than you originally thought. I really want to make sure that I'm correctly conveying I am not trying to shit on these photographers. Their photography is fine. I just think it's important that we draw a line between what is portraiture and what is street photography. Not just because of the change in public perception of what street photography is, but because I think the way that we discuss the art we create impacts the way that people view it and how they feel about it, which is ultimately kind of what art is for. Those long lenses do look cool though. They're grey. See you next week. Hey, stay hydrated and create art.